Hello and welcome to Rubaru on TIOL Tube, our brand new show that tracks India's progress and provides a perspective to change. Here we shall bring you insightful interviews with the leaders of industry and the government, key professionals discussing the matters of law, trade, taxation, policy and finance. In-depth analysis into policy architecture and corporate buoyancy, the change and what it means for India. So in our very first episode of Rubaru on TIOL Tube, today we have with us Airtel's Indirect Tax Head, Mr. Anil Bahl. Mr. Bahl, welcome to our show, and since we're talking about GST, I would like to ask you, since the model GST laws are already out in the public domain, how well prepared is the telecom sector, sir?
See, to be very frank, I think telecom, not only worldwide, but India also is a very, very complex industry.
Right.
It has a combination of entire network, which is nothing but goods. And the backbone is entire IT and technology, which is again services.
Absolutely.
And its presence is all over the country. And not only having a presence all over the country, its services are international.
Okay.
You have the international inbound roaming, you have the international outbound roaming, you have a lot of SMS hub business also from that perspective. So, pretty complex from that perspective, and I think the biggest challenge that the telecom industry sees as of today, whatever we hear and whatever we have seen in the draft GST law, the huge challenge is the telecom circles vis-a-vis states, because telecom is divided into 22 telecom circles, out of which 12 telecom circles comprise of more than one state. For example, if you take Delhi, so Delhi NCR is one telecom circle which comprises Gurgaon, part of Haryana, which comprises Noida and Ghaziabad, part of UP. So that's where the anomaly comes in. And then it has its own challenges in terms of licensing. You have mobility license separate, you have your NLD license separate, you have the ILD license separate. So then the transactions between the licenses are typical in itself.
Right.
So if I talk in terms of how the telecom industry is gearing up for the implementation of GST, today I would say it's slightly grey, because lot more clarity is required for the telecom industry in order to be absolutely compliant until there are clear specific rules.
Right, right. So according to you, what are the trouble spots in the GST laws for telecom entities, sir?
Today, if you look at the distribution channel that is deployed by a telecom industry, typically you have around thousands of distributors and you have lakhs of retailers. Like a small panwala at the nook and corner of any street is also selling a recharge, right? So, the moment you talk in terms of every person is liable to pay tax, that means you want to widen the tax net. So, are we rational enough in order to include that small panwala into the GST net? And look at the registration provisions. They say that if your overall turnover all over the country is 9 lakh rupees, you should embrace for getting into a GST registration.
Absolutely.
Now, typically, if you take an example, a guy who is selling a recharge of say 10 lakh rupees in a year, his margin is typically 3%. So, he earns around 30,000 rupees by selling a recharge of 10 lakh rupees. If you look at the GST rules per se, they say that a guy who is dealing into any product or service of any principle, he is liable to be registered without any threshold.
Okay.
All these guys are dealing into my prepaid vouchers, which ultimately are entitling to you for the telecom service. Our apprehension is, perhaps if you are talking of including a guy who is earning say 25,000 rupees or 30,000 rupees per annum into a GST net, look at his cost of compliance. Then I'll also invite your attention to the business process which is related to the registration. Pretty stringent. You need to have the ownership of the place from where you are operating. I fail to understand how you are going to obtain the electricity bill or the water bill from that poor guy who is selling a recharge at the nook of the corner of the street. Highly impossible to comply. And I would say telecom industry will be in excess of around 2 lakh crores, out of which I think prepaid should be around 1,20,000 crores. So when we talk in terms of prepaid which is sold in the market through distributors and retailers, there is going to be a huge challenge.
Right. So the key challenge itself originates from the very nature of the telecom industry. So the GST regulations, we believe, are supposed to be fine-tuned accordingly?
It is connected, it's interconnected. Now, let me explain. Typically, let's take an example that if I make a call to somebody, to my friend in Mumbai, how does telecom industry works from license perspective also? Delhi is mobility circle, Mumbai is also mobility circle. The carrier, the call carriage from Delhi to Mumbai has to be done by the NLD license. NLD license is a pan India license. It doesn't have any state boundary, right? I have to hand over the call to NLD license. NLD license has to take the call to Mumbai, and they have to terminate at the Mumbai circle. So there is a charge which NLD circle is license is going to charge to Mobility Delhi.
Okay.
Then Mumbai circle is going to charge termination to NLD circle. Now you tell me, for one company which has got a single license in its own name, NLD license also in the same company, Mobility license also in the same company name, and Delhi Mobility license also in the same company name.
Okay.
How do we manage the place of supply? Which state has got right to levy tax on what amount? Impossible. Further, more interesting, this charge as per DOT is only applicable when there is a transaction between two telecom circles. GST is a state agnostic tax. Again, let me bring you back to Delhi NCR. Similarly, instead of Mumbai, I make a call to a friend in Delhi. Today I am sitting in Gurgaon. I make a call to my friend in Delhi. NLD is not involved. It's the same telecom circle. I don't have to involve NLD in that event. You tell me, what is a difference between call made from Gurgaon to Mumbai and call made from Gurgaon to Delhi? There is no difference.
Okay.
From GST perspective, there is a difference because there is a definitive charge defined by DOT, accounted by me for the license fee purposes. But in this case, I don't have to do anything. There is no regulation on me. How do I assign a value? Plus, telecom infrastructure raced back to 94 when this telecom industry was liberalized. From 94 till 2016, so we are talking about 22 years of history. All your network systems, all your IT systems have been developed, have been made operational, they are working fine with the DOT guidelines. 22 telecom circles, multi-state circles, entire technology backbone is defined like that. Now, if we have to follow the spirit of model GST law, are we talking of overhauling the entire backbone of IT systems in telecom? Impossible ask, only to comply with one particular law. Where do we go? How do we prepare ourselves? It's a huge challenge. Today we are into a centralized single registration whereby all our revenues are liable to tax. So I think government, state governments also and the central government also must give a very fair, I would say, reasonable approach towards telecom industry, looking at the way they have been operating from decades. So a transformed tax law must not compel them into something which is the overhauling or disruption of entire network.
So right, so given that these states are going to tax services for the very first time, so does it pose any specific problem for the telecom entities?
Yeah, true. Now, to be very frank, I personally believe that telecom industry has already started their, I would say, preparations from GST perspective. And not only that, I think to the best of my knowledge, they have made certain representation to central government, and I think they have met a couple of state government officers also to appraise them, because typically you have to believe services is something which the state governments are going to tax for the very first time. They don't have any experience, and tax on services incidentally was again imposed way back in 94 only.
Okay.
So the central government also has a great experience of 22 years of taxing services, and the kind of litigation, the kind of ambiguity we are seeing today also in service tax also is magnanimous. From that perspective, where even after 2 decades of experience in taxing services, still there are bottlenecks, still there are grey areas, still there are apprehensions. For states which are going to tax it for the very first time, I think it's highly required that they are brought into that mainstream of starting to understand that services are not goods, they are absolutely different. And they need to have a very, very open mind from that perspective to understand that. And from the preparation of telecom industry, I believe the telecom industry has started the preparation. I think they have tried to map all their transactions. And I think they are trying to see the kind of impact that GST might have. And accordingly, I think they are in the process of evaluating that how far, how soon, and to what extent the systems can be tweaked. And I'm sure they will be going back to the government also in terms of telling them that if something is very, very unreasonable, if there is any ways of managing it. Because I believe nobody is in a state of mind where they don't want to pay taxes. They are more than willing to pay taxes. And in any case, we are hearing in the marketplace also, if 18% is a reality, So it anyway is a quantum jump of around 20% of taxes. Today it is 15%. So if you add more 20% to that, it is going to become 18%. So anyways, the cost of the telecom service is going to go up. So there needs to be very pragmatic view about it.
And how well prepared is Airtel to embrace the new indirect tax regime?
See, frankly speaking, Airtel being a very professional organization, so they have taken up the GST very seriously. So there is already a steering committee which is headed by the top notch in the company, and then there are very senior members who are part of the working committees, and the working committees have the sub-working groups under them. So it's a pyramid kind of entire structure. So they have already started working on their as-is processes, that in all these streams of revenue and expenditure, what are the as-is processes, and with whatever we know from the market, from the draft law, what is the kind of impact that we are expecting to have, and then on the basis of representation, if something is expected or accepted, how the impact is going to be, then I think ultimately it is going to be on the IT to deliver it. And I think the biggest challenge from the compliance perspective is, if we are forced to go into 39 registrations, which is 29 states and 7 UTs, plus maybe 1 ISD. So we are talking about 37 registrations for one telecom company. So to manage 37 registrations, 37 compliance in 37 states, and there are typically 8 returns in every state.
Okay.
So you can believe 37 into 8 is your monthly compliance, into 12 plus 12 annual returns, plus 12 audits, plus your reconciliation with the P&L and balance sheet. So you can imagine what is the ask from that perspective from the telecom industry, which till now is centralized filing 2 returns of service tax.
And do you need any special provisions for the availment of input tax credit?
See, you would have seen that the spectrum has got taxed for the very first time in this recent union budget, whereby earlier they were allowing the input tax credit of the service tax paid by the telecom companies under reverse charge on the payment made to the government for spectrum over the life of the spectrum. And industry has done a fair representation that ultimately what you're trying to do is, it's a kind of retrograde kind of tax, that the spectrum which were allocated to me in the past, at that point in time I never had any idea that I'll end up paying some tax for which credit is going to get blocked over the life of the asset. So it's kind of financial cost for me. So I think government was kind enough to consider that particular view, and I think they brought back the availability of credit into stream of 3 years in 3 equal installments rather than over the asset of the life. I think that was a very nice step from the government perspective. They understood the pain of the telecom industry. Now since we are ushering into the GST arena, so my fair expectation from the government would be that they should reconsider even this clause of 3 years also, because now all the taxes are going to get unified, lot of taxes are going to be subsumed, and ultimately the tax rates which are going to be revenue neutral from that perspective going forward also. So they should always keep into mind that the allowance of credit over a staggered period of time is nothing but kind of inverted cascading. So my only humble request to the government from that perspective would be that they should try not to keep any kind of delays in allowance of credit, which ultimately relates into some kind of cascading because of the financial impact.
Right. Right, sir. Mr. Bahl, thank you so much for sparing time for us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.